Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Roadshow News Recap. Today we're going to have a very interesting discussion about a topic we've touched on in the past, and that is how did off-roading replace the tuner car scene as the mainstream car hobby? This week, my typical co-host Craig Cole is on assignment making origami ducks out of duct tape. So I thought there was no better person to discuss all this with than an unabashed Japanese car collector, Roadshow Reviews editor John Wong. What is up, John?
Hey, Sean. Not much, man. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to talking about my horde of Japanese cars a little bit, and hopefully Craig can teach us how to make those origami ducks when he gets back.
I hope so. I really do. He's a talented guy. But yes, you are the perfect person to talk about this with from your experiences, your cars, and, living through that moment more than a lot of other people on our staff. But before we dive into that, as
So
always,
you're
I
just
have
saying
to
I'm
ask.
old, then, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Before we dive into that, I just need to say we really appreciate when you like our videos, subscribe. It helps us grow the channel. We really appreciate ringing that bell, all of that good stuff. And let us know if you want more discussions like this in some future episodes, special episodes. And with that said, without further ado, let's dive in, John. And we're going to start kind of with a look into the past with the tuning scene. So give me some of your first uh memories that has to do with this time period about the scene.
I mean, oh, geez, going way back to like the '90s, right? So I think when you think about the tuner scene, it was always there, right? It was never like just came out of the blue. There was always like a small pocket there, but I think the first thing that I can remember that kind of set it off and kind of brought it and to sort of like the mainstream was the first Gran Turismo video game for the first PlayStation. So like that offered a ton of different other cars that like, just put in front of like just the JDM scene, right? So there's all these cars where you could buy and purchase and drive on racetracks, and it was just like people never heard about a Skyline GTR back in the day. Like what was a Subaru Impreza WRX STI, Mitsubishi Evolution. So I think that was the first thing that I can think of. But then after that, like the really big thing that kind of like brought it, like just blew the whole thing up and kicked the doors in was the first Fast and Furious movie, right? So that hit the screen. And I remember going to watch that thing and like I knew about all those cars and modified Hondas and all these Japanese supercars that they had during the 90s and stuff. I mean, the 90s was like I mean, you think back to there's just a ton of awesome cars, and they're all highlighted in that movie, right? And so I remember going to see that movie. After that, walked out of the movie theater, and everyone was just so pumped, and they're just doing burnouts in front of the movie theater. They're just going nuts, and all of a sudden, VTEC is this craziest thing, and like, gosh, there's a NOS and all this nutty stuff. But I mean, it just kind of just, yeah, like I said, kicked the doors in. It just made people excited about these little four-cylinder cars. And so, like, if someone had a clapped out Civic with 150,000 miles on it, all of a sudden, like, oh, wow, there's this aftermarket where, like, we can go do some stuff to it and we can personalize it and kind of like make its like, self expression, like, make it yours, right? So,
Yeah.
though those two things I think are the biggest thing that brought it to the forefront and made it mainstream and made it cool.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Because I mean, you bring up a super great point with like the first Gran Turismo game. Like, I am a huge Gran Turismo fan, and playing that game, it was just like, what are all these weird cars that you probably haven't heard of? Because the draw to that game back in the day wasn't just like it's a racing game that had been done tens, dozens, thousands of times with video games in separate ways. But it was the ultra realism of that game, the super advanced graphics, and then that experience was plugged into these super obscure cars that you're like, what the hell is yeah, like
Yeah,
you
what
said, some of these weird
Yeah.
cars. Yeah.
What's an FTO? What are all these weird things? But
Right.
another thing to that game which brought it into it was just like you'd buy those cars and you can modify them along the way, right? So to improve the performance, to improve, aero, the looks, body kits, stuff like that, engine upgrades. And so it's just kind of like, put you in that seat to like do all these things. And, again, I think one of the main reasons why the GTR in R35 form finally made to US was because of that game, right? And then things
Yeah.
like I said, the WRX, STIs, the evolutions. I mean, no one knew about those things beforehand, right? All-wheel drive,
Yeah.
turbocharged four cylinders. No one had any clue about those things. But then they're in this video game, and then later on in that movie, and all of a sudden people are like, "Oh, this JDM forbidden fruit stuff." And so you've had all these like
Yeah.
Japanese car tuner fanboys saying like, "Oh, why isn't this coming here?" I mean, I guess the same thing with the Civic Type R too, right? Like how many years
Mhm.
and years. People are like, when's the Type R coming? When's the Type R coming? Well, and for that long period, it's like, oh, here's an SI. And, everyone, and no matter how good the SI was, everyone's going to be like, well, it's not a Type R. When's the Type R coming? And,
Yeah.
thankfully, finally, Honda brought it. But, it's just a number of cars that I think that generation, those two things, that game, that movie, and just
Yeah.
kind of help build up the scene. And it just blew up and just totally brought to the forefront. And so it's just kind of hard. I think it was hard to go anywhere without seeing a car with maybe not the greatest body kit on it, a large exhaust on it, which made it sound like
Yeah.
a wet fart when it was accelerating away. There was all that kind of stuff. But obviously there was still that like pocket of enthusiasts that like were going for like performance. And you still have you always had your track rats, right? Those have like always existed to do lap times, make it turn better, whatever. And it was just performance, right? But yeah, I think just those two things a lot really helped like the street scene get built and really shine a light on that. And just blew it up. It to eventually where it's like, I mean, again, showing my age, you go to like a Barnes and Noble back in the day, right? It's like you go to the magazine section. How many, like, there was just dozens of tuner car,
Yeah.
like
Import
related
tuner.
magazines.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
Ford
it's hard
compact
to
car,
imagine. Yeah.
yeah, Euro tuner. And they're all filled in, like, you flip through those things and they're just like monthly thick Bibles of pages of people selling body kits, rims, whatever, suspension stuff, springs, sway bars. It was just
Yeah.
like, it was just crazy. I mean, just, this is before like the internet got really, really big, right? But I mean, it was just, that's what helped build the culture. That's what helped, put in front of the masses, and people were seeking that out. And, it was a cool time. But I think eventually it just got to the point where, even like the automakers, they had to like, it caught their attention. So eventually they started rolling out like their own performance stuff, factory performance stuff from, or styling
Hmm.
things or rims. I think, it probably helped give birth to Scion. Toyota saw this whole thing. Scion came into this whole thing. And, I mean, just I remember even Hyundai offering like DC Sport battery tie downs for an
Yeah.
accent or something like that, or oil filler cap.
Yeah.
So it's just like everyone was doing something. And it's just a great time to be like, that sport compact car scene it was just crazy and huge and fun. And it was just basically something for everybody.
Yeah, I think you did a super great job underscoring how huge the scene was. For anyone who may be, a little bit younger, like it's hard to imagine, but yes, this was absolutely mainstream where everybody had to have something done to their car. And that generation of car people, this was their thing. It was, putting the body kits on and tuning and actual performance parts and aftermarket wheels and sound systems inside. It was like,
Mhm.
making crazy looking cars, but high performing cars at the same time. It just ignited a different type of car culture because there's, like you mentioned, there were always, guys and gals who liked, fast cars. So that goes back to the 50s, 40s, 60s, hot rods, muscle
Right.
cars, etc. And then,
Hmm.
like I think you can start to see in the beginning, it was, pop culture, the Fast and the Furious, Gran Turismo, and then even the Need for Speed games made that huge shift after Fast and Furious. And the
Right.
Underground series came out. So then you had even younger kids looking at all these cars and doing cool things. And it was just that's what the scene was. And it was a explosive time for car culture. And I think perhaps a offshoot to that was, it's hard to imagine a time when a Toyota Supra was affordable, but like that car was sold new in the US. And by the time the early 2000s and mid 2000s rolled around, these cool cars that are super sought after today were on a huge depreciation curve. So
Right.
like they were
No, they
actually
were.
more attainable.
Mhm. Yeah, there was a perfect time, like, yeah, early 2000s where it's like, yeah, you could get geez, even like a Nissan 300ZX, Toyota Supra, like you
Hmm.
said. I mean, Supras have always kind of held their value somehow. They always had, but like FD RX-7s. I mean, I bought my
But they weren't
RX-7.
selling for $100,000.
No, yeah, definitely not. But like, yeah, I bought my FDRX-7 in 2001 when, I guess you could say it was attainable for me. And yeah, so there was that. But like, yeah, you could pick that up. 300, like I said, a 300ZX, a Mitsubishi 3000 GT, those things in the mid 90s that were like expensive cars for the time, right? Um,
Hmm.
but then like I think also just the timing was just the timing where like I said, after that movie came out, where like those Civics and stuff like that, like a Civic Si or whatever, by that time, it's like, you could put those are on the used market. They kind of came down. They became affordable. Younger people could get them and, tune them and
Hmm.
do those things. So it was the attainable thing. Yeah, unfortunately, that's not the case nowadays for a lot of those cars, but in good condition. But yeah, I think it was just the perfect storm of yeah, that stuff, the market, and kids just getting
Yeah.
excited about it, which was cool. It was really really cool. In my opinion, anything that gets anyone excited about an automobile, pretty cool. Even if you just want to, if you want to put a not so tasteful body kit on it, fine, that's cool. That's your thing, and as long as it makes you happy, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Seriously, yeah, car people are good
Mhm,
people, Like we like car people, but I think that's a
mhm.
nice transition into kind of where we are today. The real
Yep.
crux of this discussion, and that is
Mhm.
that the scene isn't gone, but it is not mainstream at all. Those
No.
magazines, sport compact car, tuning magazines or tuning websites, I guess you would say today, they're
Yep.
not big. They're not big. And instead,
No.
what seems to have creeped through is off-roading. And
Right.
the aftermarket support for this is parallel to what the tuning scene was, 20 years ago.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I think it's just you just see like the parallels to it where it's like
Mhm.
it kind of just exploded right now, right? I mean, there's so many factory like so many brands now, car companies just embracing this off-road overlanding, unplugged, get out into the wild lifestyle, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we've always had Jeep Wranglers, right? That Jeeps have just always been there, and there's been people climbing up rocks and going on the Rubicon Trail. Wranglers has just been
Mhm.
like, just the standard, the one that's just always been there. But now you got, obviously Ford's bringing back the Bronco because go out, get wild, all that stuff, off roading. But I mean, just even like other companies now to like the mainstream, like Subaru is doing like wilderness trims for a few of their cars. Honda's doing, I think they just talked about a trail sport thing, and
Mhm.
Toyota's had their TRD Pro stuff. So it's like it's like the same thing, like repeating itself with what the tuner stuff was doing it, but just on the off-road form. And like I said, yeah, huge aftermarket. I mean, there's no shortage of rooftop tents, companies doing that kind of stuff, or yeah, to go camp in the middle of nowhere and stuff like that. So, and I think it's not like they didn't necessarily have a movie or a video game. Really, I think it's just more of like what kind of like stemmed this off, where it kind of really kicked it off is that nowadays, like, people just wanna get away and disconnect and get away from crazy cities and your phone and the internet and social media, right? So it's like, "Okay, I need to, like, completely unplug and detox myself from all this stuff." So I'm gonna go out in the middle of nowhere, set up a tent, and sit there and, I don't know, make marshmallow s'mores and stuff like that, and just relax.
Yeah.
Like you said, you can't do that in a Supra. You can't do that in any of those tuner cars. So you need something with some
Right.
ground clearance and, all-wheel drive and all that good stuff. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. And yeah, I mean, there are obviously the people that probably are kind of posers, I guess you can say. Like the closest thing they come to off-roading is maybe the unpaved shoulder on the side of the road or something like that. But it's become almost like a status symbol too, right? Those off-road cars
Mhm.
or off-road trims. And I have a buddy that's got a Toyota 4Runner TRD Pro. Never took it off road, just drives it on the road, but he likes it, and it's like, oh, it's the baddest one. He knows he can go off road if he wants to, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
But and that's that, and that's cool too. I mean, I happen to love that
Yeah,
car, so
that's an interesting thing that you pointed out there. It's almost like the potential factor. Like you own a vehicle that
right,
has potential. You may not
right,
use your off-road SUV or your pickup truck daily to go doing what this GMC Sierra you see is doing, but you can.
mm-mm.
You have that
Yes,
option, and I think that the rise of modern off-roading and its mainstream popularity because I mean again people who maybe are a little bit younger it's not uncommon perhaps I'd say anywhere you live to see a truck or an SUV rolling around with tires meant to not be on pavement
right.
or it's lifted et cetera, and like we said that's how it was like 15-20 years ago where you'd see literally like a Civic with underglow or something. Like, tell me the last time you saw a car running neon lights underneath it. Like, that's not a thing anymore. So
No,
truly, we really did. Craig and I touched on this in the past, and that's why we wanted to talk about this because it's like, where did this come from? And that's something we're going to dive into in terms of some theories that John and I discussed separately. And before we jump into that, I just got to take a quick break. And hopefully, you're enjoying this conversation. And if you are, please like and subscribe the video. We always appreciate that. I can't overstate how much we appreciate that. If you like what we're doing here, it helps us grow the channel. It helps Craig make some friends because he doesn't have any. And I'm allowed to say that because I don't have any friends either. And also, check out the standard Roadshow channel too, where we used to broadcast on. We have a lot of great videos about performance cars and off-road stuff, and Mr. John Wong is on that channel sometimes, and I think Craig's going to have something on the new Hummer EV coming up on that channel, so make sure you guys check that out as well. But with that out of the way, let's dive into these theories because you started to touch on it. So I felt like that was a good segue again. And
okay,
the thing you said was people want to get away. And that's
hmm
something I thought about with this discussion is that there is this huge, huge outdoorsy trend that has come through into the mainstream, I'd say for the last at least 5 years, where it was very cool to pack up and go do something outside that you haven't before. I'm not saying people never did that, in other years and decades past, but it's like, oh, let's go try kayaking. I've never done it in my life, but let's do it. Let's do something different. Uh, that seems to have like bubbled up and come into the mainstream and guess what vehicles are really good for that kind of stuff? Pickup trucks and SUVs. Um, so I feel like there's this correlation where Americans want to get away. They want to detox from the internet, their phones, whatever's going on in their world. And yeah, we love being outside. So you get a car or an SUV or a pickup truck that helps you realize what you want to do because you're not taking, like you said previously, a Toyota Supra out into the mud. You're not taking a 350Z out into the mud. So that is a really interesting thing that I think is a huge contributing factor to the off-roading scene coming into the mainstream because you don't even have to do really hardcore off-roading to appreciate what a pickup truck or an SUV can do from the factory. You can just take it to kind of like a more isolated campground spot and you can just roll through the mud and grass or whatever you have to get through really easily with a lot of factory vehicles today, or just at least a couple of add-ons that, Ford, Chevy, Ram will sell you at the dealer. I don't know what you think about that, John.
no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's just in addition to that stuff, I also think it's just from a practicality standpoint. Like you can take an SUV or a pickup truck and you can drive around the daily, right, and do your normal mundane, family things. Go to the grocery store, go
Mhm.
on your road trip, whatever. I mean, it can do that, but and then it can also go off-road and go take you yeah, take your kayak, take your mountain bike on there, throw, a tent, a bunch of gear, the cooler, a small grill. I mean, it's just like the flexibility that you do have in a vehicle, these off-road vehicles that you can get now is just it's kind of unmatched. It's just amazing, right? Well, back in the
Yeah.
day, like I think you could think there weren't a ton of vehicles out there, a bunch of cars that could do that. And I'm not saying like they all have to go and be able to run the Moab Trail and climb up these boulders, but yeah, like you said, like a normal, just a normal base Grand Cherokee. I mean, that can probably take care of most camping trips that, a family wants to go on, and tow a small boat or a trailer with, other things that you need to go get out in the wild and have fun, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I just it's just the flexibility of those things, and so that's kind of why they're
Yeah.
so popular. So your toy car is also your practical car, right?
Yeah, and that's something else that I thought about too that you kind of weaved into is I think if there is one segment that kind of blended things together are hot hatches. Like the Volkswagen GTI when the Mazda Speed 3 was around, the Focus ST, those cars. There were a lot of those running around, and I always said it was smart because like you just mentioned, your toy car can be your practical car. It may not like
Mhm.
a hot hatch may not be the best vehicle to put a car seat in, but you can. It can also be loaded with mulch and tools and maybe a bike. It won't have as much room as an SUV or a pickup truck, but you can do those things. But overall, the trend seems to have been rather than embrace hatchbacks, Americans have gravitated back towards larger vehicles when we saw them shunning them amid the Great Recession towards 2008,
Mm,
9, 2010, etc. Um,
I know.
but yeah, I felt like the hot hatch thing was kind of this like blip on the radar that felt like one like last grasping breath from the original tuner scene, but instead, people are going with practicality because, like you alluded to, I think Americans want to do a lot of different things. So you buy one car that can do a lot of different things.
Right. Oh, in addition to the hot hatch stuff, which it's a great point, absolutely, because you can carry quite a bit of stuff in a GTI, surprisingly. I mean, that hatch just offers you quite a bit of cargo space, believe it or not. But another thing that I'd say is that whenever, the WRX STI came out, the Evos came out, so you have all-wheel drive, right? So for people that live in a spot that do have real winters, all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, this would be an okay winter car too, because it's got all-wheel drive. Throw some winter
Mhm.
tires on it. Not only can I have like a fun track car, street car to bomb around in, like, oh, it's also got all-wheel drive. So, I'll be less likely to get stuck in the winter. Or maybe, I'll be able to go out to an unplowed parking lot in the middle of winter and do some donuts to just have a little bit of fun. So I mean, that's exactly why my nephew bought an '09 WRX, right? It's like he lives in
Mhm.
an area that gets real winters, and one of the things is like his parents want. It's like I want him to have all-wheel drive, and we're like, all right. So yeah, you automatically think about those, SUVs and small
Yeah.
crossovers. But I mean, he's a car guy, and those basically would bore him to death. So that's kind of where we're like, well, get a Subaru, and
We're putting them in a
he's got it.
WRX. Gosh darn it.
Yeah, well, we pretty much did, and gosh, I mean, the one we found had, like, a built motor and it's making, like, 305 at the wheels. And he's 16, well, he's 17 now, but I mean, like, taking him to the track, and, you know, we've kinda gone down the modification realm thing with suspension and stuff like that. So, I mean, you know, there's still some tuners out there for sure, and it's smaller,
Oh yeah.
like we've been saying here, but it's not dead.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another really great point that you mentioned was the status symbol aspect, which is another theory we wanted to talk about a little bit. You know,
Yeah.
I was thinking, back in the 90s, which would you rather have? A luxury sport coupe like maybe Acura or Lexus? I'm thinking like the SC line may have advertised, or a Jeep Cherokee. One of those is clearly nicer than the other. Where I'm
Right.
bringing this to modern times, a Jeep Grand Cherokee's interior is very, very nice. Those are very nice vehicles now. Where the mainstream brands have done this thing where instead of just offering your basic interiors and amenities, I mean, you can rival a luxury car price like a Mercedes Benz at a Jeep dealership or a Ford F1 F series or a Silverado, a GMC, So I think that um, is a big thing where pickup trucks and SUVs are also a status symbol now. And I'm not even talking like a Cadillac Escalade. I mean,
Right.
nowadays, like if somebody has a very fancy, F-150 Laramie Longhorn Texas edition, whatever it may be, you're like, that's a big dollar vehicle, so everyone's well aware.
Yeah, no, it's scary how expensive that, like, like you said, a pickup truck can get to. I mean, you're talking like a GMC Sierra Denali, like that kind of stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
that is become like you said, it is a status thing where it's like, okay, I made it, but I got this big, chrome grill on the front of it. But I mean, it's they're nicer for sure. I mean, F-150 Platinum, yeah, nicer for sure. And so
Hmm.
I think, yeah, just the depth, or like the net that the automakers have casted now with these trucks and SUVs is just so much wider. And so you if you want like the basic one for that the hardcore off-roader, right? That is gonna, take
Hmm.
it from the dealer and rip off a bunch of stock stuff and then go to the aftermarket and put bigger wheels and a lift kit and different whatever tonneau covers and whatever they want to make it off-road worthy. Like, you can do that. Or if you want to just look like a badass and like have like, and you got a bunch of money to spend, you just go to the dealer, like, give me the, yeah, like you said, the Platinum, the Denali. And, and that is like a thing where people look at it, it's like, oh, wow, you got the Denali. Cool. And it's like,
Yeah.
and they are nice. They're absolutely nice, but it's just like, there's a model, a trim level for everyone nowadays, right? So
Right.
that's another
Right.
thing where it's like you give something for something for everybody, then, it works out and you sell a ton of them. And for the automakers, I mean, they make big money on trucks and SUVs, right? Compared to,
Yep. Yep.
the small
You
Impreza, the Mazda 3, right?
Yeah, you're like the king of segue because this is the next theory that you've just rolled right into perfectly. And that is the incentive automakers do not have to build I call them the building blocks for the tuner scene.
Right.
Your Civics, the Civic still exists, but you know what I'm saying, those kinds of
Mhm.
cheaper, sportier kinds of cars.
Right.
Obviously, you and I both know building cars is a very laborious process, a difficult process, and an expensive process. Now,
Mhm.
neither of us run car companies, but if uh, someone came to you or I and said, okay, well, here's the startup cost to build this cool, sporty new car, and you might make money on it, but probably not. Or here's a vehicle your company is currently making, let's say the Jeep Wrangler, and we can create some really crazy versions of this with a V8 like the Wrangler 392, or the
Right.
4xe with all this torque, and
Mhm.
uh, and you're gonna sell a ton of them, and the profit margins are gonna be wild. It doesn't
Right.
take rocket science to figure out which way you're going to go. So, of course, automakers are embracing this because they have cheaper building blocks to create wild off road stuff. Like those platforms will pay for themselves, I'm sure, 100 times over during their life cycle instead of we need to find some sort of platform to build this sports coupe on and it has to we want it to look like this and maybe we need to develop a new engine to meet the performance targets we want when Jeep has a proven Hemi V8 they can slap in the Wrangler instead. And that's not anything new. The SUV is new, but like that power plant isn't. um, so I think it's incentive, where the way that the auto industry has shifted is resources are pouring into different fields, like electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. So these kinds of performance vehicles that could exist get pushed onto the back burner because why? You're already capturing an enthusiast crowd in one way, and you already have that platform, that engine, whatever it may be.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And to you and I, who are kind of sports compact car enthusiasts, right? It's sad, but I mean, Like,
Mhm.
the automakers are in a business, so they gotta make a business case for vehicles. And, fortunately, there are still some cars out there that kind of like are for like almost like a love letter to tuners or compact car enthusiasts. For like, for instance, like the new Subaru BRZ, Toyota 86, like those things, like just the fact that they are doing a second generation. I mean, that's just kind of like, okay,
Yep.
thank God, that's cool. Same
Yeah.
platform though that they've had or whatever, and you had to notice that two companies had to come together to make that happen, right?
Yep.
Um, and so it's like, but even at the high end, right? I mean, the only reason why the Toyota Supra exists right now is because of their partnership with BMW, right? So it's like we're using the
Mhm.
Z4 platform, we're using the Z4 engine, right? So it's like it's just for Toyota to be like, okay, we're gonna go on our own, develop a new straight six, a new platform for the Supra. It's like, I mean, it's just not gonna make sense. They're not gonna sell enough of them
Right.
to cover the cost of it. I mean, not there are some sports cars out there that can do it, that have the history, that have the pedigree, that can get away with it. Porsche 911, Chevrolet Corvette, like those things. Like
Yeah.
that's just iconic, right? Those are icons that that have their following. But, for a niche
Mhm.
vehicle, for like kind of like a Supra, I mean, not, it's a niche vehicle, right? It's just like,
Mhm.
you know, going before that board and like, give me a bag of money to go do this. We're going to be able to sell this many, and it's probably not going to cover the cost. That's kind of a hard thing to sell, unfortunately. But, fortunately, there are still things out there, right? Like you said, we still have the Civic. There's another Civic Type R coming. I mean,
Mhm.
Acura is bringing back the Integra, even though it's not going to be the
Yeah.
Integra that. Yeah, I know it's going to be sweet, but it's not going to be the Integra that you and I are like automatically thinking about, right? It's like, okay,
Yeah.
3-door hatchback, right? No, it's not going to be that.
Right.
I mean, granted, there were 4-door Integras, so it's kind of in its DNA and whatnot, but just the days of cars like a CRX, 3-door Integra, stuff like that. It's like, unfortunately, I think those are just few and far between. So, what we do
Yeah.
have, we're just gonna have to enjoy.
Yeah, yeah, seriously. The other day I was thinking about like at one point how many cool sporty cars did Honda sell? There was the CRX, there was,
Yeah.
a two-door Civic, a Civic Si, the
Prelude,
Prelude.
Prelude.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, I was just like, it's crazy to think that at one point there was a strong business case to sell these cars around the world, like not just
I
in
know.
Japan where like Honda
Mhm.
may have been bigger, but like, yeah,
Right,
bring them to the US. Like there's a market. It is insane to see how far we've come to where, I mean, the sportiest Honda you're going to get is a Civic Type R, and then you can argue Acura would sell you an NSX, but only for what another year. Then the Type S is it's saying see you later, bye.
right. Yeah, it's just it's just the changing times, man. It's like
Yeah,
the market dictates what automakers are gonna build, right, and make and provide. So, yeah. Gosh, I mean, I guess maybe that's why I'm hoarding all my old Japanese cars in my garage, right? Maybe that's just the thing. It's like, okay, we're not gonna see anything, so that's why I have 4 old Japanese cars or 5 or whatever. But like, yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, it was a grand time to think back to it. So it's like, maybe you're getting a little
yeah,
old too. You're thinking back to the olden days of, oh,
yeah.
remember when Honda did this? Ah, those are great times.
Oh, good times, good times. Yeah, then if we're sounding old, then I guess we should talk a little bit about the future before we wrap this discussion up. And I just posed a couple questions between you and I. It's kind of like where do we go from here? Like I don't think, and this discussion is not about like gosh darn it, I hate that the off-roading scene has overtaken the tuning scene. Like that's not what this is about. This was really about like it's very interesting to see how it peaked and was relevant, and now it's not really relevant, but at the same time off-roading has just exploded, and that's why we thought this would be interesting for you all to listen to and react to in the comments. Please share your thoughts and all that good stuff in the comments. But yeah, where do we go from here, John?
Well, I think from the tuner standpoint, like I said earlier, it's still around, small, be it smaller. I think the big thing right now is the turbocharged all-wheel drive rally bred cars. I mean, there's a lot of people like those cars have come down in value and became like those Civics of, in the early 2000s, right? Like attainable, right? And
Hmm.
there's a huge aftermarket support. You don't have to do a ton to it to make them really quick, and you can make them actually handle quite well. And so I think, yeah, like I've been seeing a lot of more Evo 10s around right now. So it's like I think just like the market for those have come down to make them attainable for
Hmm.
like a traditional street tuner person. So for all-wheel drive Subarus and Mitsubishi Evos. Where I live, there's a lot of Focus STs. There's a lot of those things. So front wheel drive, turbocharged, hot hatch, right? I think
Hmm.
that's it. But for that, for like off roading, I mean, I think it's gonna follow a similar thing to what the tuner cars did, but I think it's gonna have a little bit longer legs, possibly just because of how practical they are. I mean, we're just gonna
Yeah.
have more and more off-road focused things. I mean, Ford is bringing back the Bronco, right? So it's like there's
Hmm.
going to be more these get out in the wild vehicles and stuff like that. So I think that's going to happen. But I don't know. Maybe one day it's going to hit a peak where it's like there's too many people out in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden it's not cool to be out in the middle of nowhere. And maybe the cool
Yeah.
thing is to be back in the city, tied to your laptop and phone and posting stuff on social media. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. I mean, seriously, it depends on so many things. Obviously, at the top of this discussion, we talked about pop culture at the time was a huge thing. We don't have a crystal ball. If there could be something that it reignites something where people are more interested in, like street performance, like we don't know. And another thing I thought about that could be a huge curveball into the future is electric vehicles.
mhm,
Because what company has done the best job at making people who typically don't care about cars care about cars? Tesla. And
Tesla,
what do people know about a Tesla? The plaid mode,
right,
the Model S, years ago, the P100D was like the big deal or whatever that was called. And all of a sudden,
right.
people are taking their Teslas to the drag strip,
Yeah,
so that could be a huge curveball that, as automakers are investing more in EVs and we're going to see so many more of them, you know, does that influence a younger generation that, their views may be different than yours or mine to be like, I want a cool car, but I don't want that carbon footprint, while I'm
right.
driving with tailpipe emissions, but they're
Mhm.
interested in a Mustang Mach-E GT because they could track it in a way, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, just how the tuner car scene hit and then, this off-roading scene thing. I think, maybe like whatever, a few years from now, a Tesla Model 3 might be come down in value and be attainable to a younger crowd. And then, you know, I haven't really looked deep into it, but I'm pretty sure there's some, speed shops out there that are tinkering with
Mhm.
Tesla Model 3s to make them go faster, handle better, look better. I think it's just going to be like another cycle, but maybe with electric cars. And, you mentioned Ford brought the Mach E out. So there's all these other like electric cars that are coming out that could be good, blank canvases for a whole new generation of people to tinker with and become the next wave in tuners. Who knows? I wouldn't be
Yeah,
surprised if that does happen that way.
I wouldn't be surprised either. Here's my I'll look back at this in, I don't know, 30 years if this is still around on the internet, if it hasn't been deleted and my presence erased for undisclosed reasons or something. Um but I could like imagine people at a drag strip or in a parking garage at like a car meet or something with their EVs, and like what if there's like people battling on like, a tablet or something to like download new software quicker to make the car faster and change things before they head out and, run a time or something like that. Like, I don't know, I could totally foresee technology in computers and robotics uh into the mix when it comes to like a car scene, where it's like maybe you don't have to be as good with a wrench, but maybe you have to be a really good programmer to have a fast car, I don't know.
I mean, geez. I mean, I could see that happening. Is that a future I want to see? I mean, I don't know. I think I'm gonna, like I said, holding on to my old Japanese cars, man.
Oh, yeah,
But no,
yeah, I know.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I have my toys here, you have your toys there, but at the end of the day, we everyone likes cars, or anyone who likes cars, we like car people, and that's kind of the
Exactly.
moral of it. And we're interested to see where it's going to go, and what shapes it takes. But I think the final point there is, no matter what happens with the auto industry, the automobile has always had a place in the United States, in North America, in Europe, and in Asia, etc. I think there's always going to be a group of people, no matter how big or how small, that care about them, and they want to drive them, and they want to race them. It's human nature, competition, and that's really the last thing I have to say on that.
No, I think you're right. There's always going to be that pocket, and thank God, there's always going to be a car guy, no matter what. Yeah, if it's an electric car, a truck, an old,
Hmm.
beat up Civic, whatever. I mean, as long as they're digging cars, they're having fun with it, they're
Yep.
enjoying it, it's living the lifestyle. That's cool with me. Whatever you
Yeah.
like, it's cool.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that is really all we had to talk about today, everybody. So thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, let us know in the comments if you enjoyed this conversation, if you'd like to see more of these types of conversations in a special Roadshow News recap, or give me some ideas about what you'd like to hear discussed. And speaking of tuner cars, we do have some cool stuff about the new Integra coming back on the Roadshow News channel. With that said, I have to say thank you so much to John Wong for being here. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Anytime, you are welcome, because I get sick of Craig Cole sometimes. You're a breath of fresh air. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. And I just have to say thank you so much to our video team for putting this together. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this at all. And thank you again for watching this special Roadshow News recap. We will be back next week, Craig and I, to dissect and discuss the biggest automotive news stories from the past week. With that said, have a great weekend.